All right, good evening. It is 6:00 p.m. and I call to order the January 11th, 2022 Board Workshop. Do I hear a motion to open the workshop?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Henson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. All right. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. At this time, I yield the floor to Mr. Tim Oswald to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And in Mr. Anderson's absence, I'm going to ask Dr. Guyton, would you mind serving as secretary?
Yes, that'll be fine.
Thank you very much. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move that the board accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Powers. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Is there any discussion? All right. Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. I'm just going to read a real quick little thing. We are doing a board self-assessment this evening. And if you did not know, board policy BAA establishes the policy for board self-assessments. Self-assessment by the board provides valuable information, discussion, and communication in an effort to build a unified body of effective leaders, excuse me. The evaluation will assist the board as a governance team in continuous improvement. And there's more in policy BAA, and y'all are welcome to read it on your own. Our facilitator this evening is Dr. Sandra Lindsay, and I promised her that I was not going to do a long introduction of her, but I will just tell you that she has broad and deep experience and expertise in public education leadership. And she is with us on behalf of the School Boards Association to facilitate our workshop. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lindsay.
I don't like long introductions, and so we don't do that. And I'm going to have this mask off if y'all are okay, and I'll stay this far away from you to make sure we're safe. But I will give you a little background. I decided maybe you should have some idea, because I've been asked a couple of questions already. I've been at this a long time. I think if I were going back in the classroom this year, this would be my 48th year, so I really have been doing this. I've retired 4 times. It hasn't worked, so I just keep coming back and doing various kinds of things. Long time in Dorchester 2 and Somerville schools, classroom teacher and administrator, assistant superintendent for instruction for about 17 years. Thought I was going to stay there my whole life. Ended up at the Department of Education. There was this little woman named Inez Tenenbaum that asked me to come, and I said, I'm fine. They like me. I like them. I'm staying where I am. But she was very persuasive, so I ended up at the Department of Education as deputy state superintendent for that tenure, and moved from there to University of South Carolina in ed leaderships and policies, and retired from there, professor emeritus, and so that was very nice, and I thought I was finished. In the meantime, I had worked for about 3 years for the School Boards Association as an adjunct piece, writing curriculum for board training and working with boards around the state. And Greg reminded me, I also had a term with Sachs Casey, which is now Advanced Ed, and did a lot of that sort of work along the way. U.S. Department of Education grant, and I know these decades add up. I mean, I don't look this bad, but anyway, they do tend to add up. So with the Department of Education, working with state departments of education in the Southeast, working on leadership development and that sort of thing from the state level. So kind of broad and deep. I've probably sort of been there, done that, so perhaps that will give some essence to why I say, well, you might want to try this or you might want to look at that. That's been a long time journey. I now work very proudly for USC and the Department of Education, School Boards Association, the Center for Executive Educational Leadership, doing leadership development and training, which is primarily with your aspiring leaders and also with school board members and a number of folks around the state. So it's a pleasure to do that work. I go to work and enjoy those days. Thank you for doing a self-evaluation. Not all boards give this the attention that it's due. I think it's very important to check and look at yourself and see what you can learn about the development and the work that you do together for the benefit of children, particularly those in Lexington One. It's a pleasure to be here. I've long time work in Lexington One from Chester Floyd, Karen Woodward, all the way through, and lots of folks in between. Know lots of educators here, part of some development. You also ran some Grow Your Leaders cohorts that I was involved with, so I know a number of your administrators, and you have some very, very fine folks who are leading the program here, so you should be very proud of your district and what's going on. All right, our purpose tonight is to do this self-evaluation, and we're going to go right into that. I want us to do just a little bit of an opening, however, about the role. So you have in front of you a couple of quotes. You get to choose one of them, whichever one you like. Anne Marie, I think you have three because Mike is not here tonight. By the way, it's not Dr. Lindsay, it's Sandy. Wait, are we going to use first names or would you like formality? How would you like to handle tonight as we interact? First names, is everybody good with that? All right, good. It's Sandy then. We'll make that work. So choose one of those quotes. And I'm going to ask you to read one of them and tell me what in the world the topic of that has to do with being a good school board member. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
So I have two quotes. I think if I'm going to choose one,
Give us the topic first. The topic is
communication.
communication. Yeah.
And the quote says, "The art of communication is the language of leadership." And James Hume said that.
What do you think communication has to do with being a strong school board member?
Well, we're representatives of our community, so communicating back to the people that elected us. is
And
kind
to
of
each
our-
other.
And to each other, yes,
and
so that we
staff,
can
but,
effectively.
you know, it is the language of leadership. So if you're going to
Right.
lead well, the communication part of that's very important.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Who's next? Yeah, okay, Brent, that's great.
So I've got two, one's civility and the other one's confidence. So confidence, no man or woman can make you feel inferior without your consent. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Right. And since it's a personal favorite of mine, read the civility one.
Oh, yeah. Civility. The great thing about civility is that it does not require you to agree with or approve of anything. You don't even have to love your neighbor to be civil. You just have to treat your neighbor the same way you would like your neighbor to treat your grandmother or your child. Barbara Taylor Brown.
And kind of a neat quote, I think. Who's next? Amber, you going?
Sure. And I'm going to choose risk-taking. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost.
So what does risk-taking have to do with school boards? Now I'm coming back, Brent, I've got to ask you that question. What
well,
does that have to do with
You know, I mean, to me, I grew up in this district. My children are in this district. Schools have a lot of tradition, and a lot of, we've always done it that way. And I think risk-taking is a big part of leading, especially in the era that we're in with, our children are much more savvy and technologically advanced than we are, and their needs, although reading, writing, and arithmetic is still important, they also have we have to prepare them to be global citizens.
Absolutely.
And so that requires maybe, changing course or doing some things maybe not the way it's always been done, and embracing the opportunity to make new paths.
Right.
So,
And risk-taking has certainly come to the front in the last couple of years as we tried to figure out what in the world it is that you do to run schools while you're in the middle of a pandemic, so that's very true. Brent, I didn't ask you that. What does that confidence factor have to do with the role of the school board member?
Yeah, I mean, I think, problems are the currency of leadership, but sometimes you forget that when problems come to your doorstep. And so I think, school boards by their very nature are the adjudication and crossroads of a lot of decisions that are recommendations from the community, the district leadership team. And you just have to make the best decision with what you know in the moment for the most people. And then you just have to let go of the mistakes and move forward and then make a better decision next time. So.
Well said. There are a lot of right ways to do this thing called education. I mean, there really are. There's a lot of different ways we can do. There are a few wrong, a few very wrong kinds of things, but a lot of rights can be and figuring out exactly what, the one that's going to please everybody is an impossible task. What is the best that you can do? And you said that very well in all those decisions that you make, and confidence to move forward. Spending time second-guessing yourself and second-guessing yourself just gets aboard nowhere. So you've got to kind of move forward, I think, in confidence. Greg?
I'm going to do commitment and perseverance. From Napoleon Hill, you can be anything you want to be if only you believe with sufficient conviction and act in accordance with faith. For whatever the mind can achieve and believe, whatever the mind can achieve and believe, the mind can achieve, or conceive and believe. Sorry, I'll get it right eventually. The mind can achieve. There's a lot of those: achieve, believe, and conceive.
Eve words.
Yeah, so I think for me, the idea of a growth mindset has always been very attractive to me about, when we think about, in fact, the other one was actually Michelangelo, which was an interesting, talking about how hard he has to work. You just see the final product. You didn't see how hard it took to get to that final product. But I think this is something that, to me, when I think about my own children and I think about the children of the school district, I certainly, from a philosophy perspective, this is what I want our kids to understand, that it's not just about, you believe it, right? So you can believe you can do this, but I like the idea, the line in here, act in accordance with your faith. So it's not just about believing it, there's also this action a part of it, and you have to act to make that into something. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I will get reminded a lot about this microphone. I can assure you, remembering to use microphone. But the actions that it takes in order to persevere, to show that commitment, very important for school board members, very important for all in our society. Jada.
Okay. Winston Churchill, mountaintops inspire leaders, but valleys mature them.
And that topic for that one is what?
Character.
Character. That's how it builds, isn't it? And the mountaintops are easy to look out from, but it's sometimes the valleys that really mellow us and teach us the lessons that are important. So your interpretation of that
Yeah, that
one?
was my interpretation. It's easy to lead when you're on the mountain, but I think you learn the lessons when things get hard.
And
That's
the
when you
highs and
learn the
lows in
most.
life, yeah. And there are plenty of those in school board roles all around. Kyle?
Attitude, Henry Ford, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. For me, this kind of brings forth the concept of limiting beliefs. And, obviously children can be some of our best teachers. And one of the things we always try to instill within our children, whether it's at home or in the district, is you are limited only by yourself and how you perceive yourself. And so we obviously want the best for them. And we want them to perceive the best of themselves. And that's a challenge these days between social media and everything else that comes into play. Everybody has an opinion about them, and the most important opinion is the opinion of yourself. And so I think that holds true at any level, whether you're a child or an adult.
Or a school board member or whoever you are, yeah. That attitude piece matters tremendously.
Correct.
And I didn't forget you, Tim. Which one?
Okay. Well, Lucille Ball, I don't think I'd heard this one before. but
Okay,
was
I
kinda
like it.
Struck by this. I would rather regret the things I have done than the things I have not.
And the topic is
And it's initiative.
initiative.
And
Yeah,
I think
you-
it speaks to a lot of things, but mostly just taking a chance, with ideas and dreams and making those things,
A reality, yeah.
productive.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
For school board members, taking that initiative, stepping out in the faith that our youngsters need for us to do in order to have the right things to happen for them. So
Absolutely.
we could spend a lot more time, we could go back around this, but the point being is that I think you hold one of the most important roles in our public school system. It's a lot of folks have a lot of things to say about school boards these days, but I happen to be a fan. I think local decisions about the youngsters who live in your own communities are very, very important ones, and I hope to continue to see this process of elected school board members in charge of the neighborhoods and schools and that they have within their realm to continue. And we certainly honor you and celebrate you for the work you do for all of us. Face of their schools, the mantle of responsibility they carry is heavy. Every word, Every action is subject to public review, sometimes loudly, can come, and each board member must lead as one member of a collective board with an equal voice in decisions affecting the most precious resource of our society, of course, our children. The greatest natural resource that any country can have is its children. I like Danny Kaye's quote. I think that's the focus of where we'll start tonight, and also the focus to the end, and the reason that you're reflecting and taking the time to better yourself in the role that you hold, and the role of responsibility and the mantle of responsibility that you hold in this community. Where there is not community and trust and respect, ethical behaviors are difficult for the young to learn and for the old to maintain. So because you are the face of this public school system, that professional and ethical behavior become a very important part of what you do and what you say and what you are, because their eyes are always watching you. So much to discover, so much that's new. Will truth and love shine from your face? Their eyes are watching you. You're blessed with a calling to fill hearts in need. Those hearts have grown since yesterday when first you sowed the seed. These children are your work field. They are young and pure and true. Will you both love and nurture them? Because their eyes are always watching you. I think you should be chosen not merely for your qualifications, your special qualifications, but more of your character, because we lead by what we are so much more than what we say, which can sometimes be made up. All right, I'm not going to do roles and responsibilities. Y'all have been good stewards and done those with the School Boards Association. I want to get directly into your evaluation piece. It was an anonymous data collection. I only have 8 copies. They were collected at the state level, results sent to me. I have them, printed them, and we'll place them in front of you now. We're gonna, by your permission, take it kind of section at a time, look at what it has to say, look at the high points and the low points. Then we'll do that for every single section, and then there are some comments at the end that you will read, and then any reflections that you have about those comments. So that's, if that suits you, that's the way we'll handle it. Hopefully the ability to help you have a conversation without reflection. If you'll go with me to, you'll have a chance to look at it, and so we're going to do it section by section now. If you'll go to the front page of the questions and look at the first 4 questions, that's the section that was on board leadership. I want you to look at your highest score and your lowest score. Catherine, what was the highest score? What was the question for the highest score?
The highest score was from the board demonstrates a sincere and unselfish interest in public education.
Yep. Lowest score was number 3, if I'm looking at it correctly, which is
Right.
the board promotes a positive image of schools in the local media. Still a 4.1. The first section on board leadership was your highest overall score in the whole document, with an average of 4.42 out of 5. Very high score on board leadership collectively. Comments?
I just think that actually says, in spite of some other differences, that there's a recognition that this board, every individual on this board and the board collectively is focused on students. That's what I see in this.
And you're to be commended for that. Actually, this overall evaluation is it's quite strong. You all have self-assessed relatively high in all of the areas with some points and some areas where there are growth targets. There always should be when you do a self-evaluation, but you're right, Anne-Marie, to have one in board leadership that's high is a very good piece.
Well, the top 2 comments that had the most affirmation were that the one that Kathy read, but then number 1, which is the board places children's needs ahead of personal and political gains.
Which was a 1/10 of a point apart, right? So
Right, but when
two
you look
very
at
strong
all
ones.
the questions, both of those are the most positively affirming on a scale of 5.
To be proud of, I think. Questions 5 through 8 have to do with vision. Take a look at those again and read those scores, and let's talk just a little bit about your focus on vision. Jada, what's the high score in that group on vision, questions 5 through 8?
With broad community involvement, the board establishes a district-wide vision for education.
With a 4.1 mark there.
Yes.
And the lowest, Tim?
I guess number 8, the board regularly monitors progress toward achieving the district's vision, making adjustments as needed to ensure the vision is realized.
Still a 3.1. And comments about those?
I think Greg and his team have done a good job of linking the strategic plan prior to evaluation cycles, which again, wasn't always the way. We didn't always do that. And I think that was based upon feedback from previous boards, a couple of years ago. So that's been nice watching, how you've led the strategic planning cycles. And again, I think the advisory committees inform you and your team a lot about what's important. And then obviously we're hearing stuff from the community. Our issue is that, if one community member grabs us, is that the way the rest of the community feels, or is that just one out of 100+ thousands of our parents? So that's sometimes I get a little nervous that as a board we can get biased based upon the squeakiest wheel, whoever's been fussing the most or thanking the most. I mean, it could go the other way. But that way, I do think the advisory council, student, teacher, and others really help hopefully provide a more balanced perspective to you and your leadership team. So.
Strategic plans and strategic process can get really, really bogged down, and most folks don't seem to do that well. It's a tough thing to do, and all of us, I'm sure, been involved in writing strategic plans, and sometimes they end up being book stops or door stops, and rather than live documents. And so piecing them out and using them and then linking it to the evaluation programs, I think is a good piece.
Vision can, that can be a tough one.
Yeah.
For any organization, but particularly from the standpoint of long tenured organizations, I think is what you have to do is you have to sell out to the vision, and that becomes the filter in which everything is viewed. And so it's not just a budget. It's a budget filtered through the lens of our vision. And so
Right.
is it continually pointing us towards the direction that we're all rowing? And that can be hard because it oftentimes will require, a change in the way we do things. And, we're a very large district.
Absolutely.
So for us to change and to turn course, it's a very big ship in a very big ocean. And so it takes time to really take hold and to maneuver.
It does indeed. And folks mix up vision with mission statement. Mission is what you do, but vision is what it's going to look like when we've arrived. It's that far out piece. It's that target that's ever on the horizon that you're heading toward. And I won't forget that Lexington One was, when we did 21st century graduate, a leader in that process, which is a pretty visionary document talking about, a bigger picture than just what subjects kids are going to take or what particular curriculum is going to be here or there. So vision, what is it, when you've arrived, I mean, what's that vision and what's it going to look like? What's the nirvana, what's the perfect direction that we should be heading? Good points. Anything else about the vision part? 3.57 as an overall total. Questions 9 through 12, I should put these glasses on. Y'all make sure to tell me when I have misread it, is on fiscal management. Catherine, want to do top one?
So the top one is number 10, and it says, "The board has written policies which ensure efficient administration of purchasing, accounting, and payroll procedures." And that was a 4.0. And the next two were really close after that.
4.1 actually, was it? I think that one was.
Yes, that was
4.1 and then
the
two
others were
4.0s.
4.0.
And the lowest one, Anne-Marie, was what?
Number 9, which is the board works to ensure that adequate resources are distributed equitably to schools, staff, and students, and that's a 3.5.
And that's a very, very important task, but a very, very hard task, and one that folks can perceive in lots of different ways. So that one is sometimes misunderstood outside and inside for internal and external pieces, but a very important target.
The way I explain it to people is kind of like your children. We love you equally, but how your needs are different. And so sometimes it helps me explain differences between schools because, again, we're meeting school needs, not necessarily, it's not the intervention, it's the need that's being met. And again, we're trying to bring all the needs up to a common level.
Exactly. So I work with school administrators. I don't think, there's not a group that understands that fair and equal are two different things better than school administrators. If you did equally for every child and rather than fairly for every child, you'd have different decisions in some cases. A hard concept to do, but much the same here. What's fair? And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean exact dollar equality of a distribution. A hard decision for boards to look at. High marks there, a 3.9 overall in that particular category. Comments?
I just noticed as I'm going through this, so where it says with broad community involvement, the board establishes a district-wide vision. So in these two categories, vision and fiscal management, our highest scores are in one category, we established a vision, and the next category, we wrote the policies to ensure efficient administration of purchasing, accounting, and payroll. But then our lowest scores in these divisions are how we monitor that. So how we monitor progress towards achieving our vision was the lowest, and how we work to ensure that those resources are distributed equitably. So, and as we go on, I may see something, that says otherwise.
That doesn't like a trend so far.
Right.
The
I
monitoring
think we're
piece of
really
that,
good
so.
at, setting policy or establishing a vision, but then when it comes time to make sure that what we put in writing is what we're actually doing, I think that's what we could work on.
And always a target, I think, the better monitoring and the better handling of that long-term, so that's a good point. Next, an important area, accountability, instructional management. Take a look at those questions, that's 13 through 16, 13 to 15, 16.
So it looks like this was our lowest area
It is the lowest
out of
overall.
all of them. The highest within that area, though, says, the board ensures that the district sets high academic standards and measures achievement related to those, relative to those standards.
So the standards are high, but the 2.9 in that one, the lowest score, is the board obtains evidence of progress of each school toward district-wide goals and objectives. What do you make of that?
Which honestly, that kind of goes in line with what Jada just said. I think we're ensuring that we're setting these high academic standards. I think we all obviously agreed on that. But then obtaining the evidence.
Is there a growth
Interesting.
target there?
No, I mean, we don't, I mean, we have it in our strategic plan, but that's not something as a board that we go through each section of our strategic plan and say, okay, you know, what kind of evidence do we have and what are we doing as a board to ensure that each school is working towards these goals and objectives?
When I was at the Department of Education, one of the divisions in my area was data analysis, and curriculum instruction was another of the pieces of those, and statewide testing and all of those kinds of things, setting standards back in the day, doing all of those pieces, and measurement of how many kids went from don't know to know, which is basically what you want them to do, whatever the topic, whatever the information, is difficult. It's very, very hard. It's hard to do accurate. It's hard to do well. Always when I'll spend the day on Thursday talking about a new data warehouse so that statewide and district-wide we can get information out so that folks can know the accountability piece of what's happening with student performance and how much we lost with COVID loss and those kinds of things, and determining what academic performance is and what it looks like and what you measure in order to know whether they went from don't know to know. So I would tell you, because of the difficulty of measuring student achievement, you're probably always going to get a little bit lower score, but I don't want you to move off that target. I don't want you to back away from asking the questions about, did it work? We tried this new program, we tried this new curriculum, we tried this new tech series, we've tried whatever it is, and constantly looking for whether or not it worked and whether or not you have the student achievement that you need to have. It's been a terribly destructive 2.5 years for students and teachers and communities and all around. I'm not making an excuse, but that certainly is a part of the life of educators right now, is trying to figure out how and what and how do we make up for loss in time and face-to-face time and that sort of thing. So, but a target, obviously, that you need to be.
And I'd like to add, I mean, you know, it really has, especially in, I think South Carolina has just made the education infrastructure has made the word accountability kind of a dirty word. You know, or at least a word that you're afraid to throw out there too much because it sounds like holding feet to the fire. And, you know, as a board, I'm not sure that's always what we want to understand growth and progress and achievement of goals, but we also want to make sure that we're not adding another layer of policing. And that's a difficult line to find exactly where you know, how far do we push the superintendent for that? And how far does the superintendent push back and say, well, if you do this, then I'm gonna have the teachers and the principals do more. And so finding that balance is tricky, honestly.
Well, I think the best education process is by inspiration, not by threats and intimidation. I mean, that's how we work in education. We inspire each other, we inspire children to learn, and we inspire staff.
If you ask a single educator if they think we test children enough, they'd probably just completely fall out because, you know, if a child moves, we test them. If they move down the hall and spend another few minutes, we test them there, and we test them back over here, and we test them so that we spend, we're getting a bit better of that, but there was a time when we spent far more instructional day testing than we did teaching, and you don't get from don't know to know unless you teach. Testing is only finding out how far you're going. So you're absolutely right, Emery. It can be so onerous, and if you want to put this rule or this policy in, or this measure, or this accountability piece, I think you always have to remember that that is an impact that feeds down the line to an impact of whether a teacher and a student have time together to do the inspiration piece, to do the discovery piece, to do the beauty of learning and the joy of learning, rather than the task of, did I make it? You know, kind of stuff that's very hard in this business called education. It is, it's hard, you know, when you're measuring anything about a human being, to know whether it's a measure that's accurate or not. It depends, obviously, on the group of students and the individual student.
And I can't remember what I answered on these, like how I scored them, but I think all of us, our board members, are we're wary because we know that the instruction's been distracted, and we're hearing the feedback from our spouses, from our children, from our friends and family, and so we grieve that as well. So again, the issue isn't the problem. The issue is what's the best way to work yourself
What's
out
the
of that
best
problem.
answer, yeah.
Right, and unfortunately, it's the less of all evils. I mean, you have to pick the least worst
Right.
thing in
Right.
the world we're in right now. So I know for me, I think some of my responses were a little bit lower in this area because, you know, I don't know how instruction's going because it's just so, every school's different and distracted right now.
I'd be very worried about the school board if you all weren't worried about that issue. It's a very important one, a very hard one to, and one that, as you said, is driven by our fears, our concerns about what's happened over the last couple of years.
And as a, you know, as a non-educator on the board, this is probably the area I feel that the least prepared for, because it's not my vernacular.
Right.
But I do know, just in general principles, it's very hard to talk about progression during a regressive time. And that's what these past 2 years have been.
Right.
It's been a time of regression. But, you know, when you have sort of firm guidelines, firm ways of operating, firm streams of information, that, good or bad, it does help. It does help kind of peel the layers back, particularly for non-educators. And, you know, one of the things that I have found, and some of the things I remember the most over these past 4 years, have been the reports from our principal from one of our at-risk schools. And I think about that and be like, you know, that would be great to hear from all of our schools over the course of the 4 years, not just when they're at risk, but just let's hear from the best.
Right.
You know, the best performing, I shouldn't say best. But, you know, what's working for them and what's not, and then for the ones that are struggling a little bit, what's working and what's not.
Absolutely. You know, and the fact that you set very high standards here, and you have already stated that and applauded that within this program, is incredibly important. I will never forget when we were first setting statewide standards and everybody was in an uproar. I had a conversation with a 5th grade teacher in rural America, rural South Carolina, who said to me, Sandy, I'm a 5th grade teacher. I've been in this community my whole life. I love my 5th graders. They're going to be here and around me and be my nurses and maids down the line. I want very much for them to have the best education possible. I didn't realize until you set state standards that my standard for 5th grade was here, but the state expected it to be here. I just didn't have the measuring stick so that I knew where I should be targeting and what I should be doing. They can do that, and I can be a better job and do a better job of making sure they reach that. So we don't want to stop setting the standard high. We just have to find the best ways we can to figure out how to measure what the standard should be and what the progress is toward that standard. And those are very, very hard tasks, believe me, from somebody who's lived a life trying to figure the best ways to do that. We ready? Other comments, or don't let me stop you?
Well,
This
I
is
was just
your
gonna say,
conversation. Yes.
But that goes back to the fact that we just aren't obtaining evidence of that progress. I mean, we have a strategic plan, but I've been on the board since 2018, and we haven't gone through the strategic plan. We get a little section here or a little bit there, but there's been no comprehensive evaluation of the strategic plan that says, like, here was our goal and here's,
The tangible measure
Right,
for the
yes.
growth. Okay. That's what the purpose of this is to state and to talk about the things that you'd like to have and the things you feel that you need to do.
I was just, when Kyle made his comment about one of our schools' principals that come and talk, White Knoll Middles, I had written just right before you said that, I wrote number 16. So what's a practical way to do that? Because it says the board obtains evidence of progress of each school toward district-wide goals and objectives. So then the educator in me, Dr. Little, started thinking, okay, so in our schools, we'll just pick a school, pick Meadow Glen, because that's where my kids go. Those teachers within that school collaborate with each other a lot. But how often do our schools collaborate with one another? Because I think it'd be really great to make sure we have a culture of full district, not like Lexington Elementary is competing to have the best programs compared to Midway Elementary. Because I know I tell my student teachers, hey, don't reinvent the wheel. See if there's another teacher that has something that they can share, great ideas they can share with you. And so seeing evidence of each school towards district-wide goals, I think that district-wide collaboration between our schools, is that something that's going on?
Certainly at the leadership level, that's where our district leadership team meets every month. And
Within this building, or are you talking about like principals from
principals from all the schools. And so we have them collaborate in different formats. They collaborate as elementary and middle school and high school principals. They do feeder patterns. So all the Lexington principals get together, the Pillion principals get together, and so we try to get them collaborating in a number of different ways. Certainly, our Teacher Leadership Council is a district-wide representation of collaboration. Now, their collaboration looks a little different because they are picking topics that they are most interested in, like we call them passion projects, and then working towards that. They're not just coming together for, it started out a few years ago, kind of just a Q&A session. And, you had all this talent and experience and expertise sitting in the room at one time. We wanted to put that talent and expertise, really launch it by doing a lot of collaboration. So they're working a lot on those issues. Those are not necessarily, hey, how are you teaching 8th grade writing? But then our instructional components, they do have, our instructional team does a lot of collaboration amongst teachers as well. So I feel like teacher collaboration is actually, educator collaboration is pretty good throughout our district. I think it's a strength of ours, and I think they rely on each other. Now, I would also tell you that our schools probably do get a little competitive too, right? They still want to do really well, and that's certainly a part of the process as well. But I do think collaboration is a fundamental trait, and Mr. Oswald can speak to that as being from a principal perspective as well. But we try to do a lot of collaboration around a multitude of topics.
And you want a combination, you certainly want the collaboration, but you do really want a little bit of healthy competition. That just kind of, those principals who go after this or do that project or do whatever with a little healthy competition keeps the saw sharpened a little bit. So there's some good to that. You just don't want it to be unhealthy competition, I think, so.
I know there were times that we actually sent teachers and groups to other schools around the state that we saw a program that would best fit with the needs of our school. But we were quick to steal from each other as well. It's just a given.
Well, and I should have mentioned, as soon as you said that, you may have said, we do the model classroom approach as well. So we have, certainly COVID impacted this a little bit. Well, not a little bit. COVID impacted it a lot. But, where a teacher, Mr. Oswald is really good at the literacy model that we have in kindergarten, we may send, the three of us are going to go look at his class and watch him do it. And then there's a coaching sequence and a coaching model as well associated with that. So that piece of the pie, we try to get teachers across the board in other classrooms as well.
Good conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Let's look at the next section, which is school community relations and communications. That's questions 17 through 20.
You may do it. You hadn't
Yes,
picked on me yet.
please.
Okay. So the highest is the board has a comprehensive community relation policy and an authorized spokesperson at 3.9. And the lowest is the board maintains visibility, participating actively in school and community affairs at 3.1.
Yeah, all threes in that category, 3.1 to 3.9, and an overall score of 3.7. Comments, pieces about that? You know, it's kind of a can't-win situation. If you're out in schools as school board members, then they're sometimes a little nervous about that. If you don't come, why don't you care about us? And so it's sort of you have to find your the right measure of being visible and out there.
Well, I think that's one of the things we all grieve is because of COVID, we just haven't been in the schools as much. But again, if we're asking our community not to come in schools, then how can we
How can you go
tromping around
and do that?
schools? So I get it.
Yeah.
But I think all of us miss it.
Something you want to do more of and want to get back to a little bit more as soon as you can. Other comments about school and community relations and communications?
I was just gonna say, it's not like we're in the schools, like, besides as a group, as a board anyway. I mean, I think we should be individually allowed to go into schools and visit and do whatever, you know, if we're invited, sit in the classroom, we should be able to do that. I just want to say I'm a little surprised also that we didn't score the lowest on seeking the input of the community and local governing bodies. I'm surprised we scored lower on maintaining visibility.
Interesting dynamic. Meetings of the board, next
Hey,
section.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Just
no,
real
it's your
quick.
meeting, you get to do this.
Jada, if you change the word from board to district in 19, the district seeks the input of parents, community groups, service organizations, and local governing bodies. I don't know, I might have, when I was scoring this, read it
Right.
that way.
I've noticed that in a couple of these that, and I think
Because I think
even-
I personally think they do. I think that they
Right.
do seek the input.
And a lot of times even the community gets confused about the board and the district. They don't realize that, the board, you know, governs the
team.
district.
It's a
Right.
team.
But that we're separate.
Yeah.
They think, when you think of board, you think of district. So yeah, maybe that's what happened is, you know, you read it as board, but think about district.
It's the one prime problem with surveys, it matters how you read it when you answer the question. It
Well, and
does.
I would
That's
just
one of the
add, you know,
shortcomings of
I
it.
mean, like on 19, I mean, there are formal, you know, seeking of input with groups, and then there's informal. Like I'm a part of a number of different community groups, and there is never a shortage of conversation about school district
Absolutely.
issues when I attend those. Same with, you know, I've got a number of, you know, associates that are on town council or in the legislature who I regularly communicate about things that are hot button issues or, you know, things that are happening that have, you know, made their way into their purview. And so I don't know that it's necessarily, you know, we're having a town hall and all of county council and the school board is there.
Right.
I mean, I consider this more, and yeah, there is a tendency to read it as the district. And I think when I did my survey, I kept having to reread it in my head because
It's a good thing to do, yeah.
it is. And you know, and I think, you know, when Dr. Little goes and attends a chamber meeting and gets some input, he'll share with the board, you know, I met with, you know, and they're going to be doing this, or they were very receptive to this idea. And so I think on our behalf, he does some more of the formal
Exactly.
meetings. And so, because I mean, really, as school board members, we're the liaison with the community. And so that's more of us in individual capacity as a group than as a group.
And I would propose to you that your individual conversations as you're about your business and as you are known as board members and you interact with the various constituencies that you interact with, that makes it 7 times the interaction and the number of folks that, and organizations than it does if you invite a group to, where you're all here and they're all here for legislators, which tends to be not always as productive as the conversation that you have just as you go through, my husband and son used to not, they'd go to the grocery store and say, Mama, you sit in the car. If you go into that grocery store, we are not getting out of there for, you're going to be getting input. And they made me drive to church by myself sometimes because they knew I was going to be a lot longer than they by the time you finished chatting and answering those questions about what was going on in school. So you have those conversations whether you want to have them or not, and they're, I think, important. And reach a lot more, and in a more casual way that gives you the sense of what's going on. So just keep your eyes and ears open, and the opportunities for input will present themselves, I think. So.
And what I would say is that we've made some differentiation between the district and the board, and again, I think we should be one entity because we're stronger together.
A team,
so, again,
and about the same thing, yeah.
But they need someone to hold them accountable, and that's where we come into the picture as the board.
So one vision of a board is to a watchdog. I would say a better vision of the board is a collaborator with the superintendent and his or her team to execute on what's best for the educational needs of their community.
And we could do both. We could be a collaborator and a watchdog.
Well,
It's a different relationship.
Yeah, a board that micromanages has gone beyond the pale with that. Your role is oversight. The district and the superintendent is management, and so that. But you are a team. You are a team that needs to have the same base basically on other things. But you do have individual oversight roles as opposed to administration roles that that apparently you all have worked out pretty well. There may be some issues and points for growth, but that's you're right. You can do both and not not ruin the relationship that needs to be a team and a face that speaks for public education in Lexington One. We are at meetings of the board. Kyle, how about doing that one for us? That one was kind of an equation.
Exactly. So we'll take an average of 22, 23, and 24 at 3.5. Of course, scored highest in the board conducts meetings in a business-like manner following accepted parliamentary procedure. And then not a huge difference between the other questions at a 3.5 for each of those. Again, I think this speaks to my perception is that oftentimes administrators and school officials and those kind of things are not necessarily perceived as the professional people that they are. They're very professional people that can handle most any situation. And so a lot of times when we hear things that come to us through the community or, from my party of 4 at home, it may be, well, have you worked through the channels? Have you worked through and allowed these very professional people to do just that, to do their profession? And sometimes we'll find that's the case, and sometimes we'll find that's not the case. And so the expectation is always that you work through and allow people to be professional, just like the expectation is when we sit here, when we sit in executive session, wherever it may be, that we're going to conduct ourselves in a way that is becoming of a professional organization, because that's who we represent, not only for the district, but also for the community at large.
Productive, organized meetings say that clearer than any other message that you can send. You need to handle the business, but do the business in a way that's organized and professional and ethical and clear, and communication. All of those pieces have to be an important part of that. And you all scored well in that category. Relationship with the superintendent, he walked out. Is this indicative? There he is. Get back here. Questions 25 through 28. Tim, what was the high in that one?
I guess 27, the board displays confidence in the superintendent by making decisions concerning the district after considering the superintendent's recommendations.
And the low?
The board immediately discusses matters likely to alienate either board members or the superintendent.
Okay, any comments about board superintendent relations? You mean you guys aren't willing to say, hey, for fear of alienation of the other one, huh? So that,
I mean, you
good news,
could.
bad news.
Yeah, it just doesn't do any good. So, it's, I mean, you can talk about it all day long and say, hey, but there's still gonna be members alienated.
Explain that.
So I've sent several emails and had discussions about, well, for example, myself, I'm left out of a lot of things. And I guess it's just, whoever's doing it just doesn't see it that way, or says, okay, I'm going to do better, or, we're gonna work on this, it won't happen again. But it just continues to happen.
This is a platform where folks get to say what they're thinking.
So the one question I wrote down is, where does the board stop and the superintendent start, and vice versa? And I think therein lies the challenge, not for this board, but for all boards and all superintendents, both within this state
No
and
doubt.
within this nation.
No doubt.
I think this pandemic has clearly demonstrated that the lines are blurred. And we have some guidance through state law, but we don't have great guidance. I mean, if you go to the South Carolina Code of Laws and read, they talk more about school buildings than they do
Absolutely.
anything else. And so, does that make us construction managers? I don't think so. But does it also make us managers of the inner workings of the district? I don't think so either. I think there is a unified team that's all rowing in the same direction. But I think having a clear understanding of our roles and responsibilities is the biggest challenge that faces not only us, but all districts.
You would be correct. I've done this intuitive dance with lots of boards across the state and even some outside the state, and deciding what that best management, supervision, oversight equation is going to be is always a difficult one. I will tell you that the most effective boards who have run the most effective school systems typically have a system that looks a bit more like yours, which is an educated, involved board, but a board that leaves, the boards that fail, let me put it this opposite way, get too much down in the weeds, and so that they, of micromanagement, edging on micromanagement, and what that tends to do is make the superintendent paranoid and to spend all of his time working with the board and not doing the work that it takes to lead a very complex system, which is called schools. And so, I don't take accountability and I don't take oversight away. It certainly needs to be there. But professional and ethical and dealing with business, and the biggest word is trust. You need to trust that the administration will do the work that they need to do. And when you don't trust, or when you have an issue, then it is your responsibility to ask and to see what's going on. But that's a very intuitive dance that's done in different ways at lots of different places. The best one I ever worked with was one where there was a very strong relationship between board and superintendent, and they operated as a team. And it made a very successful school district and a very good relationship for the community and for the board. You all have the makings of that, and I think it's important that you work out the kinks of that. And you need to say what's working and what's not, and that's why you're here tonight. That's an important piece.
I think what's working is that there are a few chosen members who have a good working relationship with the superintendent. And when you sped through that roles and responsibilities and said, okay, y'all understand all this, I think, and even according to this, that that's what we need more help with than anything else, is understanding our roles and responsibilities.
And we can go back through it. I was doing that for time tonight. There certainly are opportunities for you to think through and sort of define for each other and determine for this board what those particular roles and responsibilities are going to be. They're the big pieces of management being the superintendent's purview and oversight being your purview, and not kind of getting in the way of either in that process. But there's still a great deal of oversight that the superintendent has to do as well. And so that can get, as Kyle just said a few minutes ago, blurred lines are rampant when you start talking about what those particular roles and responsibilities are going to be.
But at the end of the day, the superintendent is the advocate and the agent of change for the board. So again, he or she is our knight in shining armor. So
That has
again, it is a collaborative advocacy relationship is how this works effectively.
And that allows the superintendent to do bolder things than is allowed when you are asking for this piece. When you ask for information, data, a whole sort of report about this or that or the other, remember that is going to take someone who was doing something else worthwhile off the spot to do that, and it filters on down for those kinds of things. And those are necessary sometimes, but they should not be casual requests. I think there's nothing that makes those folks that sit over there more upset than to be charged with something that they are good, conscientious folks, will go back, spend hours, days, whatever it is, pulling that report together because the board has asked for it. And they get to a board meeting sometimes and they say, oh, we're moved on from that. That's demoralizing. That's taking folks' time away. That's, I won't hash those roles. I have strong feelings both ways, and you folks have to work that out for your own intuitive piece. But I think you're thinking about the right things and looking at it in the right way.
I would just like to say, I completely disagree with that statement that the superintendent is our knight in shining armor. And I think that's the whole problem with this board, is we don't hold the superintendent accountable, that he is put on a pedestal. And that's why, the board has to sign off on the strategic plan every year. We haven't even seen it, and I've been on the board since 2018. How is this even possible? I don't even know what to say, really.
Well, it's important that you say it out loud.
Yeah.
We have one last section and lots to do within the time, so I'm going to move us on to policymaking, which was a high area. Those are questions 29 through 32. Anne Marie, why don't you take honors on that one? You had a...
All righty. I'll start with the low point. The low point was 29, which is the board operates according to written policies, which it updates as necessary, and that's a 3.5. And then there was a tie for high, both at 4.3, which is the board concentrates on developing policies and allows the superintendent to administer them. And the board follows its prescribed role as a policy body and does not become involved in making administrative decisions. Those are very similar
They are.
statements.
Mm-hmm. And they really reflect back to the conversation that we just had, which is those two statements about allowing the administration to do that well and your role as policy and governance. Comments about that section? Any further pieces there?
Well, I'm just going to say, and this kind of goes back to the previous conversation, but this kind of encapsulate it. We talk a lot about the board as governance and the superintendent as management, and the superintendent is the board's one employee. And we hold him accountable, and we have a regular opportunity to do that at his evaluation. And that evaluation is, and we've just revamped it for this coming year, and there was a lot of board support for the new format. And we conducted his evaluation, and we arrived at a consensus, and it was a very high evaluation. And to me, that is the board speaking about the superintendent's performance. And I don't think that it is the board's role then to constantly question, but we do have an obligation as his supervisor to conduct his evaluations in a proper manner, which is during the evaluation time, not on a regular basis every time we have a microphone in front of us. So.
You are right. Once a decision is made by the board, by the majority of the board, then it should be the voice of the board that goes forward from now on. We're in a special session now where we're talking about the pieces and the parts, and apparently you all are being pretty honest and frank around the table, and that's a good thing. I'm going to move, because of the interest of time, to the specific questions that you had about the three most important issues the board will face in the next 12 months. And you were asked to list yours in a 1, 2, 3 order. And so that first one, I want you to look at really carefully so that you see what other folks said for those most important issues that you're facing coming up. By my count, COVID and learning loss were 5 of them, and school and student safety were 2 of those out of that group. Someone could have written, I suppose, a 2-part kind of thing in there. I have no idea for the number, but
So were these combined? So we each listed our 3 most important issues.
and this is the first issue that you listed.
Right.
Everybody's number 1 is in this block.
Okay.
And then your number 2 issues are listed next and are somewhat similar to your 1 issues, except that you move more into the land management and building of schools, and again, you mentioned academic decline, referendum rezoning, building 2 new schools, which are to-do list, obviously, that you all have to take care of coming up. And then your 3s. Be sure to read through those. You hit some strong targets. Any comments about pieces there? You think anybody thinks they left off the list after thinking about this for a while, or do you have them listed?
You know, I think the clear favorite on here is learning loss, or again, the sort of regression
Right.
that we talked about. My wife and I had a interesting conversation today, and I think sometimes our children may feel a little pressured that we're asking, especially right now during the time of EOCs and, you know, end of semester testing and all this other stuff. And so we want them to perform at their best. And I think they feel the pressure of that, and I don't think it's just specific to my children. I think it's probably a lot of children that they feel that pressure from their parents because the parents look around and see how things have been.
Right.
And there's this overwhelming fear that because of the difficulties of these past couple years and currently, that they're just not getting what they need. And we're doing everything we can to address that with the constraints that we have. But I don't just think it's the children that are feeling it. I think it's the parents that are feeling it. And thus, the parent-child relationship becomes strained as a result. And thus, the parent-teacher relationship can become constrained. And thus, and so you see the trickle-down effect
Snowballing.
that occurs. And so, again, I don't think it's anything specific to my house. I think it's probably most houses right now that are having these while they may not be the same conversations, they may be the very same feelings. And to me, that's the thing that speaks out the most, that, you know, we just have to address what we have to address and say, this is a real issue for us.
Can't undo what has happened, but what can we do going forward? And I think you just described, Kyle, what every, probably these parents they're here tonight, they're afraid. They want all that they can get for their children. They want them to have the best opportunity, and teachers want that, and administrators want that, school board members want that. We all want that, and to try to figure out the best way to get through what's been a real stumbling block for the progress that was going forward in this district and in others. So, and it's tangible and it's real, and I think fear, and I do think that's a lot of I try to look at that in ways when I'm watching reactions in front of school boards across the country and some of the things that are going on. They're afraid, they're concerned, they're frightened about decisions and feeling helpless, and therefore that comes out sometimes in some stronger ways than it did prior to the pandemic. That's where we are, and so we address and we move forward, and the fact that you all have high standards and are pressing toward those and trying to find ways to do that is what we do need to be doing at this point in time.
Right. And I think it does go back to the quote that we read at the beginning about, limiting beliefs.
Right.
And we get to make a choice, ultimately.
Right.
Do we accept that, or do we say,
Do something about
no,
it.
we can't accept that. We're not going to limit ourselves to our environment at this point. We're going to do everything we can to overcome that, and instead of having that backward or rear-facing look, we need to have that forward-facing look.
Agreed. We're going to look at those strengths of the board as a whole, and you did that the same way. You listed 3 of those, and all of your 1s are in the 1 category, and then 2 and 3. By my count, administration teamwork was considered a strength by 3. Your relationship with community had a couple of mentions in there, and then students as priority, a couple of mentions. You put those 3 together, your students and your administrative team and the community, to have those as strengths is something to celebrate. Give you a chance to glance at 2 and 3 in there. I love the first one and the second piece, that everybody has or had students in the district, so you relate to parents. Respect, and provide good ideas and feedback, and allowing the administration to do its job, and voice of the community, working with parents and community. All of those are considered by you to be strengths of the board. I like the fact that you're fairly diverse with respect to age and gender and life experiences, and bring that to the role. Definite divergent opinions in those, but and weaknesses. The last section, again, 1, 2, and 3. I note what I would call isolated conflict. I would note some communication issues, board process issues, perhaps, trust issues mentioned there as weaknesses. And that is actually pretty much repeated in tone in 2 and in 3.
Something that keeps jumping out at me from the, this last kind of free response section, I guess.
That's what we should look at next, Anne Marie. So if you
Well,
pull that.
actually, the 3 questions, I guess,
okay.
the answers that came through, for the most part, I mean, whether it's what should the board work on in the next 12 months, the strengths and the weaknesses, overall, most of those seem to fit or are consistent with the very beginning and vision, and our vision for students. There are a few that are inward focused, or just the mechanics of how we do things, or personalities.
Exactly.
And I feel like that is kind of telling somewhere our weaknesses are, is that anytime we're just focused on just the, as you said, isolated conflict or disagreements, every time we spend time on that, we are taking our eyes off of that vision. And that just comes through to me in all of these lists. So that's just my comment about
Yep.
that.
So on here several times, it says one rogue member, reactive and disruptive board member. So inability to have honest conversations with each other without fear of release to outside parties. So since we're doing a board self-assessment, does anyone mind speaking about the one rogue board member and a reactive and disruptive board member? And any ideas they might have to fix that?
Jade, I have comments. Let me do it that way. That might be easier. In surveys that I do with, it's clear in that information that the board perceives an individual person as a rogue board member or as a disruptive member. That was clear, kind of, it came up again
When you
and
say
again
the
and again.
board, is that like 5, 6 members?
It appears to be one member.
No, I'm saying like how many people? You said the board. I'm just wondering, when you say the board, are you saying like 4 members, 5 members of the board? 6
I counted that as a mention in 1, 2, or 3 in several board members. I don't know the exact count of that. I don't think I looked at that carefully. In one of the surveys that I do with boards is to ask them a series of questions. And in the questions that I ask them, I ask if you have stopped listening to any board member as a reflective question. The other question I ask is, have you stopped listening to minority opinions? Because you do so at your peril. Because a lot of the important changes that have happened in our country were at one time a minority or a single voice opinion. So from that kind of thing you're doing tonight, the honesty of those pieces, can come growth. That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is one of conflict management for the person who perceives themselves as that outsider within the board piece. This is what I generally say. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you getting what you want? Is it working? And if not, is there something else you want to try? Because if that voice is important, if the things that you're talking about are important for the board to hear, and they're just not hearing it, because sometimes if the only tool in your toolkit is a hammer, then everything starts to look like a nail, and you hit it, perhaps grating on those around you with what you're saying. So that there's a quote about this. Sometimes it causes folks to, before they look, they've already made up their mind about what you're about to say because of history or those pieces. So the toolkit can also contain sandpaper for smoothing out edges. It can contain wrenches to change the way you do things a little bit. It can contain a pair of pliers to pull folks along with you. So if you continue as that voice that is the contrary voice again and again and again and again, you do it repeatedly, saying the same sorts of things, it's making you ineffective. And you need to be effective, every single one of you. And you need to listen to each other, every single one of you. So there's that to look at. There obviously is that dynamic. As a matter of fact, I usually have 4 or 5 targets for boards as I leave after they've done a self-evaluation. Yours primarily is communications and trust. That is that one factor that you all ended up naming in that final piece. And so it's up to you at this point in time. Those of you who tend to be in the majority and the person or so that tends to be in a minority with an opinion or with a different way of looking at this. And so you've got to work that out, and you've got to figure out ways that that will work for you, or if it is interrupting the work of the board. So I'm going home. You all are going to be here, and you'll be back together in another few days and another few weeks, and it'll be a continuing communication between you. So if, it's something for you to reflect on and for you to do. I'd want to be effective. I'd want to figure a way so that what I'm saying is heard, not discounted. If you're the majority, you need to be much more attentive to the elements of what are being said. It may not be all that's being said, but the elements of what are being said that are important for you to see and to make change if changes are necessary. That's my 2 cents worth. So that's what I offer to you. You need to look at that last piece. That was quite a long series of comments. It's important, based on what I've just said to you, that you take a look at that. So I'm going to give you an opportunity, a little bit longer opportunity to look at that.
I think it takes a lot of effort to run an organization and do it in such a way that will be productive and have trust and respect. You know, I think over the years I've learned that, you know, I started out as a band director, try taking a bunch of teenagers, you know, and trying to organize. You have to really work at relationship building. And I think it has to be meaningful relationships that will be productive down the road. We can't just come in and, you know, start demanding things of other folks that we haven't taken time to build that relationship.
I think that's an
And
excellent point, Tim.
I think that works in any setting, not just a board, but at running a school, running an organization, a community club. You have to take time to build meaningful relationships.
And to to know folks and to know what their interests are, and that does make it work better. So spending some time doing that, I think, is a very positive piece. Others? Okay. You're not. I think I probably stopped you
Well,
before
I
you had a
wrote it,
chance.
so no need to read it. I've already read it.
Those are your self-evaluations. Those are the pieces. I think you have fodder for conversation and for accolades for yourself and for targets for growth. A few slides I'm going to run through really quickly that I think are redundant, but maybe not, and then we'll wrap this up and let you all ponder and decide what steps you want to take next. Don't let me forget to have you do an evaluation piece at the end, or Gwen Hampton will be upset with me. So we'll make sure that we've
Sandy,
done those. Yeah.
right before you move on, just to piggyback off of a word that Tim said, I know you told us just to pick one quote in the beginning, but I just can't not share the relationships one. It says, kind words can be short and easy to speak, but their echoes are truly endless. So I just thought that was kind of a little just thing to ponder on.
It is. It is indeed.
Well, and Sandy, I just want to say, I mean, I have no doubt whatsoever that every person, because I know these people, that every person in this room is called to be in the position that they're in right now, for whatever reason, and we can't judge somebody else's call or judge their motivation. But I also, I have been struck for the last 24 hours, just saying the fruit of the Spirit over and over in my head, because I think we often need to remind ourselves that, you know, there's love, joy, peace, patience, but then there's kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And I think we kind of give short shrift to those at the end, because we're busy and life is active and life is loud, because our phones are always either yelling words at us in print, on social media, or somebody's always trying to contact us. And I mean, where we are right now in our world and in our community, we just all need to be kinder and gentler and better and more faithful to what we believe, and trust other people that they're being faithful to what they believe. And so that's just all I want to say.
Space for each other. I think that's an important piece. You just led into this next one. Both Kathy and Anne Marie heard me say some of these things in a school board thing that I did recently, but my new word is PEC. It stands for being professional, for being ethical, for being clear in your communication, and then to smother a whole bunch of kindness right on top of that. If we all did those four things, particularly in this role as school board members and administrators, if we were professional, if we were ethical, if we were clear in our communications, and if we did so with kindness, we'd have a lot better interaction, a lot better understanding, I think, of each other. Leading is saying what you mean and meaning what you say and acting accordingly. I love Warren Bennis's work about leading. You have to accept people as they are, not as you'd like them to be. You need to approach problems and relationships in terms of the present, not the past. You all have the opportunity tonight to take this book and say, okay, that was past history. We're going to turn the page and do things differently going forward. Looking at the history and constantly harping on what somebody did then and past transgressions is not as healthy as looking at the future and thinking about what the possibilities are that are ahead of you. Treating those close to you with the same courteous attention you extend to strangers and casual acquaintances. You all meet together a lot, and sometimes we forget to that kindness word when we're interacting and working with those closest to us. Ed Lindsay used to say when I'd come home, why don't you aren't you nice to me? I heard you being very nice to that person that I know you disagree with out da 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 da. And I didn't even get the kind word when you walk back in the door. Well, we forget sometimes to treat those folks closest to us with the kindness that they deserve. You have to trust. Folks have trouble with that, but I'd rather go through life trusting and sometimes being disappointed by folks than thinking that folks are scoundrels all the time. So trust is an important part of leadership. And then learning to do without constant approval and recognition from others. You're not going to get that. You're going to have your own self-confidence. You're going to have your own peace to take care of some of those pieces, but I think that's good leadership advice. Effective ethical leadership does start with trust, and that's the hardest thing to develop and can be easily broken. All the trust you built can be emptied out very quickly with just a word or an action, so working on trust is incredibly important. I did this earlier. If you're trying to work through conflict, if you're not being heard the way you want to be heard, what is it that you want? And what are you doing to get it? And is it working? And if it's not working, do you want to try to figure out a way so that it will work? That's the real task, I think, of conflict resolution. This was the quote I couldn't do. Very uncivil discussions can occur because sometimes what you see depends on what you thought before you look. So we can have biases. We sometimes just don't listen because we have already made up our mind about what that person is or says or whatever. Tone of voice, we've talked about that, and words. We did that a little bit in the quotes earlier on. Words can be soft as somewhere, but the tone can break a heart. How you say it matters as much as what you say. So you have to always kind of watch the tone. And if you're making, yes,
I think with tone, though, it's so hard because so much of what we do is written.
Oh.
And through text and email, sometimes tone. I was actually talking with my mom the other day, and she said, I try to read texts because she doesn't do those emojis and stuff. She's like, when people send me texts, I try to read it with the best intentions. And so that's kind of interesting because sometimes tone can be like.
Tone is totally left out of emails and even more so out of text. Remember one of the first kerfuffles that I had to undo when I went to the Department of Education was an email exchange about a very strong, supportive vendor of the Department of Education who sometimes was a little forceful. And so these were two of my staff members who had sent emails back and forth about this particular vendor and hit send all. You know how that can happen. So, you know, undoing those things, and the tone was really bad in that. You can sometimes get a little tone with those pieces, but when I can stand and talk with you face to face, I can monitor that tone and make a difference, but it's really hard to do in those other communications, and so much of what we do is done through email or text and that kind of thing. If you're gonna apologize, and good heavens, I say to a leader, if you don't know how to say I'm sorry, my only advice for you is to practice, because you're gonna need to do that a lot. You need to apologize because you're not always gonna get it right. But it has to be an expression of regret. Sorry I did that. What went wrong? I didn't mean to do X and X. An acknowledgement of the responsibility. I did it, my responsibility. I repent, a declaration of repentance, and offer repair, and then a request for forgiveness. If you don't do an apology that includes all of those elements, you haven't really said you're sorry. I see a lot of these. I'm sorry if anybody was offended by what I said. The translation of that is that's completely empty. It conveys a meaning that's both underhanded and cynical, and it shows absolutely no empathy or sincerity. So when you say you're sorry for this or that and apologize to each other, you have to remember the elements, all the elements have to be there. Tact is the ability to tell someone to go to hell in such a way that they look forward to the trip. So I suggest that you try doing the tactful piece of that. Another one that's a favorite of mine, never argue with stupid people. They'll drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience. That's a Twain quote. So, and my last one comes from Warren Buffett's indispensable life advice. You can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. You know, you don't have to do it right now, in this moment, in this argument, in this place. You can think about it, and if you still need to do it tomorrow, you still have that opportunity to do that on another day. So delaying sometimes what we say. Somebody had that quote from Twain. Who had the Twain quote about, what was the Twain quote?
Something about silence.
Yeah, do that one for us, Tim.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites. I didn't read it. But it's gonna be
It's going to be the last piece of paper you pick up. There it is.
about listening. Sometimes it's better to stay silent and let people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
Don't you love Twain? Twain said that's great points for all of us. So these are the kind of destructive, uncivil behaviors that you want to avoid. This needing to win at all cost. Never want to display anger. Always, you talked about calm and control and professional, and that's important. Never demeaning others, never retaliating. Avoiding or ignoring the other person and acting distant or aloof, but then also the opposite of that is yielding and giving in to the other person in order to avoid conflict. Both of those can be uncivil and destructive. Hiding your emotions. You do need to say what you're thinking and do that in a professional way. And then self-criticizing. I bet you all do this. You go back and play it over your mind. I should have said so-and-so, and I wish I'd have done this and that and the other. You should go through all of those. Meeting manners. Ask for recognition, be brief and to the point, make your point calmly, keep an open mind, listen without bias, understand, seek first to understand and then to be understood, understand what's said, avoid side conversations. You want to respect other people's opinions and avoid personal agendas. Come prepared to do what's good for the organization, what's good for children, and you should have fun doing this. This is good work, good important work. So, and if you don't act civilly and professionally, then you're going to have terrible communication and diminished trust and increased stress and loss of community respect and difficulty in getting anything done. And it makes board work a chore rather than a joy. And most importantly, we don't honor this role to which we've been elected. It's important to collaborate. We talked about that earlier. Don't underuse the administrative team and avail yourself of the fellow board members around you who are equally and or uniquely qualified and were duly elected to the board just like you were. So you need to use each other and collaborate with each other. I end early, I'm telling you, with a favorite movie of mine, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I'm sure you've seen. There's a scene at the beginning of it that's one of my favorites. There are these three guys who are on the chain gang, and they are escaping from the chain gang and booking it through the countryside ahead of the guard and the guns and the dogs. And so they collapse to make a plan. And first, Delmer says, no, it's Pete that says, I'm the leader. I'm in charge. Then Ulysses, who was in for fraud and a lot of other kinds of things, says, no, I'm the leader. I'm in charge. Then Delmer, who says little of intelligence of the whole rest of the movie, says something very profound. They've asked him to break the tie. Who's the leader? So he looks up at Pete, and up at Ulysses, and down at the chains, and he says, I'm with you fellas. You guys in this room are not physically chained together, but you are professionally linked in the work that you do. And when one of you succeeds, the other one succeeds. And when one of you fails, the other ones fail. It's important for your organization that you do the work that you need to do, and as often as possible, you look at each other and say, I'm with you fellas. Now, for Gwen Hampton, be sure that you fill out that evaluation piece about tonight's session, and I'll make sure that she gets those. Any questions, comments, anything that I can do for you before we close it out? You can do one of two things with those evaluations. You may take them with you. You can turn them back in. I don't know what you choose to do. That's up to you. I do have copies, Greg, for the missing board members so that we get that done. Yeah. Yes, please. Yes, please.
All right, well,
And
let's
Marie-
go ahead and adjourn before we spend time filling that out. Y'all all right with that? Okay. And thank you, Dr. Sandy Lindsay, very much. This was excellent. I really appreciate you spending the evening with us and the work you put in ahead of our time together. Our next board meeting is next Tuesday, January 18th. Hopefully, we will not be iced in, and we will actually be here. So let's go ahead. Do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Dr. Guyton, was that a second?
That's the second.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please complete your evaluation. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.